I moved away from the city on a whim, or maybe it was a slow erosion of restlessness that finally nudged me out the door. Either way, I found myself answering an ad for a night attendant position at the old Holloway Lodge, a weathered 3-story building that sat like a sleeping thing at the edge of a black lake and the deeper dark of the Whitlow Woods. The job was simple on paper. Check the cameras, log the rounds, keep the building from falling into neglect. The pay was better than I expected for a place that hadn't had regular guests in years, and the manager, a woman named May with a voice like linen, said the night shift came with quiet and a view. I told myself quiet was exactly what I wanted. The first night I drove the long road in, under a slate sky, and the lodge's windows glowed like pinned eyes in a vast, indifferent landscape. There was a single overturned chair on the porch and a brass bell that refused to ring, but the kettle sang on the stove as if someone had been here moments before. May handed me a ring of keys and a slim scrapbook, the cover worn to near translucence. "Read the rules," she said, and there were rules, neat and unloving. "Keep the lights on in the main hall until dawn. Never answer the third knock. Do not let anyone in who claims to be lost without your radio check. Don't leave the grounds after curfew." She folded the paper and added almost casually, "It helps to do the rounds." I nodded, but even as I did, I felt the air of the lodge press against me like a question. The first week passed in small rituals. I learned where the floorboards complained, which doors caught in the cold, which camera angles blurred into the woods like black paint. I logged empty corridors, an unlocked linen closet, a chair in the library that faced the fireplace, though the grate had been cold for decades. The town, Ridge Hollow, sat 12 miles away down a road that clung to the shoreline. It was the sort of place where the main street was a single strip of storefronts with one stoplight, a bakery that closed at 7, and a notice board where people pinned flyers about lost pets and church suppers. There was, the locals said when they were willing to speak, a kind of mutual understanding among houses in Ridge Hollow. There were unspoken times for doors to be locked, for blinds to be drawn, for porch lights to stay lit. People called them customs or traditions, or sometimes nothing more than the way things had always been. They laughed about them with an easy fondness that never reached their eyes. I asked questions because the nights lengthened into an old, patient rhythm, and curiosity is a force that will not be denied, but the answers were elliptical. Stories of odd noises in the early hours, a child who stopped leaving the yard at a certain hour because her mother told her the road gets cold, the simple admonition to keep your lights on. I treated those snippets like the polite lies towns tell newcomers and tried hard to fold them into the city mechanic of my skepticism. My skepticism lasted until the first night the lake decided to speak. Around 2 in the morning, the lodge's cameras, which otherwise showed little more than the slow sway of trees and the long vertical of the moon, caught something like movement on the water, a blackness that rose and uncoiled, maybe a ripple or a shadow. Maybe only the way the night wanted to be seen. I watched the feed until my coffee grew cold. A boat had not crossed that portion of the lake in decades, as far as the records said, and there was no dock light to explain that silhouette. The movement passed as if it had a destination. For a moment, the shoreline glimmered with 100 tiny reflections, like a scattering of eyes. After that, the nights began to stack themselves on top of one another, in a way that made sleep feel like a borrowed thing. People in town would offer me soup or a loaf of bread, and they would press one extra thing into my hand without mention: a pocket lantern, a small stamped card of instructions, a key that was not for any door in my lodge. "If it mosquitoes out, keep it with you," May told me with too much gentleness on a night when the wind wanted to pry the windows from their frames. I found the card inside the scrapbook the first time I opened it. The scrapbook smelled like dust and rain and contained notes from prior attendants, brief lines of handwriting that began with practical things and frayed into warnings. One entry read, "I stayed the week and never saw the sunrise." Another said, "The third knock is different. Do not answer it." The language tightened like a muscle when the writers mentioned the woods, as if the mere reference made it sit up. A small pressed leaf fell from between the pages with a darker stain at its edge, something that could have been sap or shadow. I slipped it into my pocket and felt suddenly absurd for doing so, as if superstition itself might be contagious. Curfew in Ridge Hollow was not enforced by law, but by an older social contract. Store owners closed perfectly on time, and headlights dimmed for the stretch of road that ran alongside the pines. Once, one of the locals, a woman named Ruth, who kept bees and spoke in proverbs, told me of a bell far into the woods that rang when the town had been good. "When the bell rings twice in winter," she said with the matter-of-fact cadence of someone recounting weather, "we keep our windows shut and our doors closed 3 minutes longer." I asked why, and she answered as if concluding the sentence with me, that the bell meant the woods were awake. I did not believe her then, not in the way a child believes in monsters, but belief is a malleable thing, a porcelain cup that cracks under temperature change. The more nights I kept watch, the more events accrued that resisted tidy explanation. A man walked up the lodge drive once and left footprints that started at the tree line and went only to the porch, as if he had taken one step, crossed an invisible threshold, and found himself somewhere else entirely. He was gone by morning. His footprints alone seemed both recent and impossible, pressed fresh into the frost where the rest of the yard remained untouched. On another night, the radio burst with static and a voice that repeated, "Not yet, not yet," and every channel carried it like a single agreed-upon secret. I tried to catalog these occurrences like I cataloged the building's quirks, but cataloging is a way to impose order on an unruly world, and sometimes the world resists. Then the children began to draw. It started small. Pinned to the notice board in town was a roughly colored paper of a house with too many windows and a face in the garden. A child had circled the face in crayon and written, "Who is she?" I laughed at first because laughter is the automatic solvent for discomfort, but there were more drawings. Simple figures traced in wax that appeared in mailboxes and on car windshields and tucked under my doormat. They were always similar. A place, sometimes a house, sometimes a tower of trees, sometimes an outline of the lake, and a person drawn with unblinking eyes, then a question. Who is he? Who is she? The faces were always smiling. I kept those drawings in a drawer for a week, the way one keeps things that might be evidence but feel too private to show others. One night, I left a drawing on the reception desk while I made my rounds, intending to return it in the morning, and when I came back, the page was gone with a pen mark in the margin that looked like a small, neat X. The next afternoon, a woman from town brought over a pie and an apology that only implied what it meant. "Kids like to leave things," she said, and then, softer, "they like places that look back." Around the same time, the lodge's hall clock began losing minutes at an uneven rate. The second hand would drift, then lurch, as if some animal of time had decided to twitch. I noticed it when the kitchen timer dinged, and the clock outside the lobby read a different hour. Gloves were sometimes misplaced. Shoes left in the mud simply vanished. May said nothing, but her face folded into a look that seemed to store long winters. The patterns tightened. Lights that had been on would go out in the center of a night, only to flicker back seconds later. A melody, perhaps wind, perhaps a distant radio from a car 2 towns over, might thread itself into the wiring and make the kettle tremble though it was empty. The camera in the parking lot would, with increasing frequency, capture a shadow at the edge of the tree line that matched the posture of someone waiting, though no one walked to it in the footage. People in Ridge Hollow began to offer me reminders as if to inoculate me against forgetting. Lock your doors, keep a small light, do not whistle after midnight. If you hear tapping, be still. The tapping, they explained, was patient. It wanted to be invited. I treated it with the same skeptical politeness I had reserved for Ruth and the bell and the card, but one night tapping woke me from a sleep so complete I had to check my hands to prove I still existed. It was coming from the wall of the library, under the portrait of a linen-faced man. I opened the door and pressed my ear to the wood. The sound was steady, polite, like someone knocking a little finger on the inside of a closed container. It did not stop. I found in the ledger a note that read, "Do not answer it like a joke, meant for late hours." And yet something in me wanted to answer with the gentle courtesy of a man used to opening doors. I did not. I waited until the tapping slowed and then ceased altogether. The next morning I found in the library a small wooden box that had not been there before, smooth and unlocked, its lid slightly ajar as if some careful thing had left in haste. Inside lay a tiny, child-sized shoe and a scrap of paper with only one line. We were keeping watch. I slept poorly after that and watched the cameras with a clutching attention that made me feel foolish and alive. Each night the woods pressed a little closer, not with movement I could point to, but with a density that made the air taste of metal and old leaves. On my 13th night, a bus came down the road at precisely midnight and stopped in the middle of nowhere, its taillights a pair of tired eyes. No one rode it in. I watched the footage as if the screen held the answer to a private question. A single figure stepped from the bus and walked toward the tree line, not toward the lodge, and yet glimpses of the figure's path indicated it had visited the porches of several houses before melting into the dark. The bus drove on as if delighted to have delivered him somewhere not on any map. There were other small, disquieting things. A neighbor who kept a row of lamps burning, lining their driveway like a translucent fence. Someone across the lake who hung a coat on a tree branch, then took it down at dawn. The sudden, complete silence that would fall in the middle of a conversation among townspeople as if the air itself had pressed pause to listen. The scrapbook entries grew more earnest in the margins. Remember the freight train. Doesn't exist. Remember to say the last name of the man in the painting. Remember to leave the light in the stained glass window lit. I began to speak those small phrases aloud in the empty lobby, not because I believed they were spells, but because the rhythm of speaking them felt like a rope thrown to a swimmer. One night, the bell May mentioned in the woods did ring. It was not the deep, clarion toll of the church, but a sad, thin peal that echoed as if from a place with a long throat. The town held its breath. Shopkeepers stepped outside with hands on the doorways. Dogs lowered their heads. Everyone watched the line of treetops as if expecting a face to emerge between the branches. The bell rang twice. The rules worked like a chorus then. Windows were fastened, curtains closed, lights left on for an hour longer, and for a time the town hummed with a defensive light. That night I walked the lodge perimeter with my pocket lantern and the card May had given me, reading and rereading the instructions as if they were the map out of a labyrinth. The woods seemed to breathe outward in time with my heartbeat. At the edge of the lake I found a circle of small stones, each stone set with near care and a tiny carved notch. It looked like a child's attempt at a ritual. In the center lay a single folded paper that smelled faintly of rain. I unfolded it with hands that knew better and read simply, "Do not forget us." It was not signed. I knew then that the rules were less about preventing things from happening than about remembering the shape of permission. Ridge Hollow had learned certain habits: lights, closed shutters, lanterns at the window, because the town had discovered there were hours when the world was porous, and those habits mended the holes. The more I learned, the more I understood that the lodge was a thin place, a seam between the ordinary and something that operated according to patient, ancient logic. There was never a moment of theatrical horror, no scene of tearing or blood. Rather, the unease lived in small misalignments. Clocks that slipped, shadows that caught at the corner of the lens, music that played just beyond hearing. Monotony was the loudest trick. Nothing dramatic needed to happen when the buildup was slow enough to wear you down. My final transformation from skeptic to someone who understood in his bones came gently, with near banal cruelty. One night, a child left a drawing under my pillow, showing a house in which every window glowed, a small figure standing at the edge of the lawn. The child had written in careful letters, "Please leave a light for me." I pressed the paper to my chest with a ridiculous tenderness, and then, with the exaggerated care of a man performing a ritual, I walked through the lodge and lit every lamp I could find, from the dining hall to the broom closet, until the building felt like a warm throat. The night deepened, and the windows shone like eyes. The tapping returned, softer, and I thought of the small wooden box in the library and the shoe inside it. The tapping came not from the library this time, but from the front door, precise and polite. I waited longer than I felt comfortable. A voice said, through the boards, "Do you have a light?" It was childlike and careful. The rules confessed with more cruelty than any horror. Answer and you invite, refuse and you risk a loneliness on the doorstep. I scooped up the lantern May had given me and walked to the door. I did not open it. Instead, I set the lantern on the stoop and watched through the peephole as the flame trembled and then steadied. The knocking ceased. In the morning, the lantern was gone, and a new drawing lay on the threshold, uncreased and fresh. It depicted the lodge with one window blacked out, the rest bright, and under it a single sentence: "Thank you for remembering." There are stories that end with a tidy explanation or a triumphant escape, and there are those that leave you with a trembling sense that the world is larger and more patient than your small life allows. Ridge Hollow's story was the latter. I stayed through the winter, keeping the lights and reading the margins. I learned to move with restraint, to answer only when necessary, to treat the town's customs like an old, delicate machine, careful, steady, unhurried. Sometimes a stranger would arrive at dawn, worn and bewildered, who would sit in the lobby and talk of dreams that smelled like pine sap, of footsteps that came from nowhere. They would leave with the scrapbook under their arm, a private inheritance of cautions, and sometimes you could see in their faces that they understood the rules now in the way someone understands a life-changing law. I learned in the end that the sort of horror that traps a mind is not always the sort that scars a body. Ridge Hollow taught me that there are boundaries in the world woven from habit and light, and when those boundaries fail, it is not with a scream, but with a soft, invasive attention that makes you feel seen in the wrong way. The town's children continued to draw and to ask their questions. Some nights, I answered from behind the door with a gentleness I had not known I possessed, and other nights I left a lantern in the yard and let the dark go on its errand. May left in the spring, leaving me the keys and the scrapbook and her voice in my head like a small, steady flame. People would sometimes ask me if I was afraid. I would think of the bell and the tapping and the folded papers and say, "I'm careful." That answer was truer than I could have imagined when I first drove down the road. It is not the sort of ending you can sell as a lesson. It is quieter than a lesson. What stayed with me was not a single event, but a continuing practice. To light the lamp, to close the shutters, to leave a place of warmth for those who might be traveling through the dark. The rules do not feel heroic. They are humble, neighborly. They are also effective. I do not know if one keeps the world safe or merely keeps oneself sane, but I do know that nights are kinder when someone remembers you with a light. And if you ever find yourself on a lonely road near a lake with a lodge that looks like an old story, and if someone slides into your hands a scrap of paper with rules on it, keep them. They may ask nothing of you more complicated than a small courtesy, a small lamp, a general, careful kindness. In Ridge Hollow, that was everything, and it was enough.